Hello, everyone. Welcome to SEYO once again. I'm Trisha Tunstall, and I'm excited to be welcoming you to this session, very special session of SEYO featuring Evelyn Glennie. I would like to give a little introduction to her, and then we'll start straight away asking questions. Dame Evelyn Glennie is often hailed as the world's premier solo percussionist. Born in Aberdeenshire, Scotland, she tours widely and internationally with a great variety of orchestras and collaborators, including Bjork, Bella Fleck, Bobby McFerrin, the Royal Shakespeare Company, and many others. She also gives masterclasses and school performances, and particularly inspiring to us, she was a founder of the Music in Education Consortium, which successfully lobbied the UK government for infusions of support for music education for all children. In 2020, she collaborated with the music charity Sound World, composing a new piece called The Grace of Silence for their coronavirus fund for freelance musicians. In her spare time, she also plays the great Highland bagpipes and has her own registered tartan, known as the Rhythms of Evelyn Glennie. She is also, as you all know, a celebrated motivational speaker. Dame Evelyn is known throughout the world as a champion of social cohesion through music. And last year, she was named an official ambassador for Systema Scotland. She has said that her commitment to social cohesion and developing listening awareness is a lifelong mission. Of course, this is also the mission of Systema Europe and all Systema-inspired programs around the world. So we are honored and thrilled to have her with us today, to chat with us and to answer questions. Dame Evelyn, welcome to SEYO SummerFest.
Thank you very much indeed for that lovely introduction, especially as I know how early it is in the morning for you. But it's such a pleasure for us all to meet like this and for technology to allow us to exchange a few ideas and views perhaps in the next hour or so. So thank you for this opportunity.
You're very welcome. And we are thrilled to be honorary members of Systema Europe for this session as well. So I'm going to start with a question about your ambassadorship for Systema Scotland. We'd love to know what kind of activities that involves for you and what excites you about the position.
Well, it's a really new position for me to be involved with, but I think I've been very aware of the history of Systema Scotland and, of course, the whole Systema program throughout the world and the impact that that has had. And of course, having experienced such a strong music education myself, growing up in rural northeast Aberdeenshire, I completely understand how crucial it is, the importance of having music as your daily medicine, really. I don't quite understand how the description soft has come about in connection with music and how we describe it as a soft subject. But nevertheless, thankfully, we seem to be heading in a more positive direction with the funding that schools are getting now from the Scottish Government. And it's through the extraordinary work and the vision of Systema Scotland that we have seen remarkable results. And so when I was asked to be involved with them, it was very hard to find a reason to say no, to be honest. So, and I think really, the first steps, once we're able to move more freely, emerging from COVID-19, is to meet with the youngsters and their families. I mean, that is whom we're serving, and the communities, and just find out their stories. Because I think, I remember the days when I was at school, and the school really wanted to connect with the stories of the pupils, not just what the school thought the story might be. And it's remarkable how, it's like peeling an onion, the layers and layers and the depth of an individual. And you need time and patience, just as you do when you're learning a piece of music, to get to know an individual. That just doesn't happen in 5 minutes. So I think really that's a major, major part of what I'd like to do, is to just get in there, just chat to them, just see what's what, and to understand why music is so important to them. We all know that there are so many strands of music, and I've realized that it's trying to link the various subjects together that's so important. And music doesn't just mean spending hours and hours a day playing a musical instrument. It doesn't mean just reading dots on a page and trying to make sense of that notation. We're dealing with engineering, we're dealing with physics, we're dealing with acoustics, we're dealing with teamwork, we're dealing with decision making. We're dealing with all sorts of things that can really affect so many of the other aspects of our lives. So thinking laterally about all of this is really crucial.
I'd love, you mentioned a bit earlier your own musical upbringing in rural Scotland, and I would love it if you could speak a little bit about what that was like and what that meant to you and what you bring, how much of that you bring to your work now.
Well, really, I was brought up on a farm. I'm a farmer's daughter, and I went to a primary school that only had about 37 pupils in the entire school. So, we had to have external teachers come into the school to deal with music, to deal with art, to deal with many other different subjects, because obviously the school only had two teachers and they couldn't cover just absolutely everything. However, it was very easy for a music teacher or an art teacher to cover the whole school in one afternoon. So by the time we left that school at the age of 11, 12 years old, we could all actually read music. And but not only that, we were bringing the dance element, the poetry reading, the storytelling, the history of Scotland, bringing traditional Scottish music all together as one. Rather than, oh, that's music, oh, now it's art, oh, now it's drama, and seeing them as separate subjects. And that's had a massive impact on my whole journey because, of course, being a percussion player and a multi percussion player, I have to see all of the instruments as one and to try to link the techniques of playing marimba to playing snare drum to playing a cymbal, playing cymbal to playing a woodblock or playing a vibraphone or timpani and so on. So I don't see them as separate instruments, but try to find the common sources, the common techniques and so on. And also explore techniques on those different instruments that you might think don't belong to that instrument, but they very much do. So, and I feel that that was something that I relished as a youngster. I loved just making those connections. And that was very much the case when I went to secondary school, which was a much larger school that I think had about something like, I don't know, 1,100, 1,200 pupils. But the ethos was that every child has a story to tell. And this is what, Systema is all about. Every child has a story to tell, and we have to listen to that story. And sometimes that story, may not be easily told through the spoken word, but it might be able to become more clear through something that is drawn, or some movement that's made, or some sound that is created. And so, trying to pick up on these very subtle things is what we do as musicians. Why do we spend hours and hours in a room, trying to link one note to another note? What is it that we're actually listening to? We can strike that note and strike that note. So technically we can play the piece, but, what is that difference between interpreting something and translating something? And we're all about trying to interpret that person. And as we negotiate technology, as we are now, the difference between reading a question in the chat to having someone actually and being able to see that person ask the question is enormously different. So, and I think we're experiencing that with performances, just as we're asked maybe to perform in our living rooms or whatever it might be in our homes. It may not necessarily be the right kind of headspace that we want to negotiate. Performance isn't just like switching on a tap. There are so many elements of that performance that we have to negotiate. So I think again, this whole connecting of subjects was so important, and that actually led to a project I embarked on with a composer, Joel Jarman, and scientist Chris Lloyd, called Sounds of Science. And it was all about thinking, going back 10,000 years worth of man-made sounds, Because when we think of history, we don't actually think of history in an oral context. You know, we don't think, oh well, what was the soundscape 10,000 years ago, or 100 years ago, or something. But we look at pictures, we read books, we listen to people, and so on, and we try to grasp history, and we go to museums and whatever it may be. And so we discovered that really this was a fantastic project that brought so many disciplines together. It brought improvisation, it brought Foley, the art of Foley, creating sounds. How do you create the sound of fire? How do you create the sound of stone tool making? How do you create the sound of helium, and so on? And that's not about being a musician, that's just about letting the imagination fly and think, okay, can a plastic bag create the feel of fire, you know, the crackling of fire, or stepping on some twigs or something? So, you know, I think this whole idea of being free to let that imagination go is absolutely paramount, not just in the artistic world, but in everything that we do. So, and this was very much the ethos of the school that I went to, because the school understood that within that school there's a great chef, there's a great electrician, there's a great musician, an artist, a footballer, whatever it might be, a shopkeeper, a speaker, you know, you name it. And it was up to the school to plant these seeds and to try to ease out the individuals and see, you know, where they kind of fall and what territory they might be interested in. And you know, all of this is so connected to when I play, for example, brand new pieces of music. That you know, you don't have recordings to compare, you don't have other performances to compare. You're seeing this piece of music, and you have to have faith in yourself to navigate through that piece of music. And it means trying all sorts of ideas and then maybe shelving some of the ideas. It's very rare for me to sort of take an idea and then, you know, scrap it and throw it in the bin. I normally just sort of know I'll shelve that, because you just never ever know. And so when I talk about talking with the youngsters in my work with Systema Scotland, it's really about that, because ultimately they need to be the conductor of the program as well. You know, we're like a brand new piece of music. We're all giving the world premiere. The presence of the audience, you know, is part of that performance, and we're all part of this premiere, as it were. And so a musician is affected by the audience, the audience is affected by the musician, and so together, you know, we're in this sort of experience of the now of giving that performance. So it's making this a living experience for our youngsters, I feel.
Beautiful. You know, I have thought of you as being the ambassador for Scotland, System of Scotland. But when you're speaking now, I can understand that you are not only that, you are also the ambassador to the children of System of Scotland, sort of the ambassador from the art of music to the children of System of Scotland. It's very exciting to think of you working with the children.
Well, I think that a lot of the thinking here is, and I really ought to mention my peripatetic percussion teacher when I was at school, when I started percussion from the age of 12, Mr. Ron Forbes, because, you know, in those days, we didn't have mountains of percussion music or exercise books or instruments and things like that. And what he would do was that he would take a piece of Bach, or a bit of ragtime by Scott Joplin, or traditional music, or whatever it was. And, you know, let's say we took a bit of Bach, and he would say, right, let's play this piece of music on the snare drum. Now, most people might think, how is that going to happen? You know, that's impossible. But actually, when you think about this, if we just take the first phrase of any kind of piece of music, doesn't matter what it is, and we're asked to look at that phrase, we see a shape, you know. And so we're looking at that phrase from a musician's point of view. And what he would say is that take note of the key signature. Now, of course, a snare drum is normally in a neutral clef. There is no key signature at all to that. There can be time signatures, but not key signatures. But he would say, please take note of the key signature. Now, whatever, this piece might have been in D minor or G major or E major or whatever it is, then he would have said, okay, so you feel it's in D minor. What does D minor feel like? Not sound like, but feel like. So does D minor, well, whatever it feels like for me today. So D minor might feel a bit desolate. It might feel a bit lonely. It might feel a bit sparse, or it might feel almost major, almost happy, or it might feel just a bit thin and puny, or it might feel actually quite a thick minor, quite a present minor. It could be quite a threatening minor. What does it feel like? And when you ask someone what something feels like, you're tapping into your own, inside of yourself. So really, he's asking us to listen to our own feelings in relation to that minor key or whatever key it might be, and then to translate that onto the snare drum. So to create the sense of touch that is a minor lonely key or a kind of minor scattery key, all of that sense of touch reflects on how you feel towards that key. And so already, you're tapping into things that you're never actually going to be instructed to do on the page of music. So it's not going to say, please strike the drum at this particular height and bring your sticks up 6 inches or whatever it is. This is all coming innately from your understanding of what that key feels like. And it goes on and on like that. And then take note of the phrasing there, where's the beginning, middle, and end? Where's it going to? Where's the little climax point there? Again, this is fed through the snare drum. And so all of these things can be fed through castanets, a tambourine, a triangle. So it's what I meant earlier about trying to link those things up, that all of the time you're dealing with a musical story. So when you're dealing with a brand new piece of music, you're dealing with a story. You're trying to find what that story might be. And it can change, it doesn't have to be the same story every single time you play the piece of music. And I think the joy I get from being a musician is bringing this element of improvisation, of discovery, of just sort of spending time, having more than one date with this piece of music, and really, just sort of asking the questions, well, what if? Well, what would happen if I did that? Oh, crumbs, that didn't work at all. Well, why didn't that work? Oh, well, maybe this, maybe that. So constantly you're improving your kind of, I suppose, conversation with yourself, rather than waiting for somebody to say, please do this, please do that, please play it like this, please, and you're trying to shoulder all of these rules and regulations, and then it becomes a kind of right and wrong, and that isn't what music is, and that's not what Systema is about. Systema is making people grow. So if they decide to become an accountant, that's fantastic, but music plays such an important part in the buoyancy of that individual moving forward.
Beautiful, beautiful. You're speaking about the improvisatory nature of playing even composed music. So I want to bring in a question from Eric Booth, who put one in the chat box. Eric, can you ask the question?
Sure. And just before I do, I'd like to presume to tell a little story of my seeing a performance Evelyn led in the United States. You mentioned earlier your sensitivity to the performer audience interplay, and I saw Evelyn design this event and then lead it, in which she had the audience perform John Cage's 4 minutes and 33 seconds in its various movements to sharpen the acuity of their hearing. And as I was part of the event, I got to see what a gigantic impact it had on the audience to actually focus that much attention on their hearing and actually discover the music in ambient, undiscovered sound. And it was the boldest tribute to listening that I had ever seen. And it was the intimacy of the performer-audience relationship I'd never seen before. Anyway, my question is noting the remarkableness in your career of the balance between performing the classics and new works and a gigantic life of improvisation. So much of what you've offered to the world has been the courage of your improvisational expression. And I wondered if you had thoughts about the balance or interplay between performance, even the sensitive way you're describing it today, and improvisation. In the development of a young musician, what is an optimum balance or interplay between those two kinds of musical work?
Thank you, Eric. It's a great question, really, because funnily enough, we're all born as improvisers, as born improvisers, and then we're popped in this kind of landscape of rules and regulations and so on, and then it's really hard to then move out of that to become improvisers again. But we are inherently amazing improvisers. I think as a percussion player, first and foremost, we are often known to be able to improvise simply because composers often ask what is possible to do on an instrument. And so, or can you do this on the instrument? Can you do that on the instrument? And we might say, well, I don't know, I've never tried that before. And then we tried. So in a way, that's kind of the first sort of steps to improvising. But funny enough, when I look at educational music books, and sometimes it might have a little kind of practice routine that you follow. So how much time have you done on your scales, on your exercises, on a piece of music, on sight reading and so on. I have never seen improvisation listed on there. And I think this is the most crucial aspect that any of us, any youngster, as soon as possible. I mean, when a youngster goes into primary school, they're improvising. And if we can somehow find a way for this to be a key element in their continual development, I think it would be absolutely amazing. Because certainly I think the impact for me, again going back to my peripatetic percussion teacher, he saw all of his pupils, including myself, as sound creators first and foremost. So it didn't matter whether you were a percussion player, violinist, vocalist, pianist, paper and cone player, it didn't matter. Sound creators, that's what we do as musicians, that's the common thing we do. And then, of course, we have to make sense of that story, hence the musicianship. And then we become the instrumentalist. So we need the tools in order to do that. So in my case, it's percussion. So the tools are like the ingredients of being in a kitchen or something. So you can have all of the ingredients laid out there. But a meal isn't going to happen by just looking at those ingredients. You have to bring all of the ingredients together to create that meal that we enjoy. And likewise, in being a musician, we've got to bring our tools together. So in my case, the mallets, the instrument, the music and so on, bring that together as a musician. But ultimately, the difference between myself and another musician and another musician and another musician is that sound creation, because that is all about our natural body shape, our engine, our weight, just what we have to deal with. So in my case, I'm 5'2". I have relatively short arms, so there are certain things that I can do well on marimba and I'm in control of. There are other things I do on marimba that I'm not in control of because, and it's not down to I need to do more practice, it's down to the fact I simply don't have long enough arms to create the sound that is in my head to negotiate that. So it's just a sheer natural physical thing. And that's that. And so we have to accept what is it our bodies can do. So it's always important to think about bringing the technique to the body rather than forcing the body to that technique and thinking, oh, I can't do this, I can't do this, I can't do this, and trying to get that body to work. Ultimately, if I can't stretch, that on the marimba, no amount of extra hours will make it happen. So, so I think that is also part of our unique journey in how we move forward. And this is where improvisation is key, because it allows us to truly tap into not just mentally what we're thinking, but physically how we're negotiating the tools that we move forward with. So improvisation for me I would love to see it as part of the exams that we have and part of anything that we do. Funnily enough, when you look at percussion concertos, it will come to a cadenza and there's just this blank box. And it says, well, we'll improvise. Very often, you won't see that very often with violin or piano or something. Often it's written out or whatever. But for some reason, for percussionists, we just, oh, okay, and off we go. So, but really, I'd love to see orchestras improvise together. I'd love to see our chamber orchestras, our ensembles, and so on have an element in the normal subscription series that has an improvised piece of music in a concert, and it will be remarkable how exciting that would be, I think, for an audience. But I think going back to the John Cage thing, because what we did there, in case people have not been aware, was that the piece, as you stated, is in 3 movements, and I think we asked the audience to, I can't remember the order now, but it was something like, the first movement, listen to yourself, only yourself, and then listen to those around you in the second movement. So just be aware of just those people around you, in front of you, behind you, of the presence of people. And then the third movement was listen to the space that we're in. And yes, we had some remarkable feedback from the audience. And I remember one lady whose husband had just had a stroke, and the whole communication with her husband had changed since he had his stroke. And she could no longer communicate with him through the spoken word because he found it extremely difficult to speak. But suddenly this piece of music allowed her to be with him in a way that gave such tremendous weight to his presence, and being aware of just his every tiny little move, And it's that kind of zooming in. As musicians, we zoom in and we zoom out, and it's just knowing when to do that. And improvisation is doing both, because you're feeding off the audience, but also you're zooming in to what you're feeling yourself.
Thank you so much. And I second your challenge for orchestras and musicians to take on the improvisational challenge as just a part of the palette of sharing. Beautiful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Peter, I'd love to move to you now.
Thanks, Tricia. So I just had a quick follow-up question on this same subject. But first of all, I'll just introduce myself. I'm Peter Nicholson. For those that don't know me, I'm the Director of Music at Systema Scotland. So I just want to say on behalf of our organisation, we're absolutely thrilled that Evelyn's taken on this role. And I've chatted with Evelyn a couple of times now, and I'm always amazed. Well, I shouldn't be amazed, but how well she gets what we do, and the whole conversation you have about it being about stories and about relationship, and about how music is the agency for developing those relationships and eliciting those stories from the young people, both musically but also about their lives, is so critical. So it's just. I think it's wonderful how you get that so well. I have a vested interest in this. I'm also extremely passionate as an improviser. I play in fact, just last night, I'm part of an international improvising network. We meet on Zoom each week, and improvisation has been a core part of my practice since I can remember. And in my early days, I remember at Systema Scotland, I introduced some improvisation practice, and we are now developing that. And I do want to see it absolutely embedded in our curriculum. I think it's so critical. It is, but I want it to be more so. But I think when I first introduced this on a Systema stage, there was some resistance to the idea of improvising, and it was definitely not easily assimilated. And certainly from other partners, from international partners, there was oh, what's this? And certainly within orchestras, there's a sense of, I don't understand this. I don't know what it is. So my question, I suppose, is following up on Eric, is that ambition to get orchestras to do this. But have you seen a shift? Because my perception is there is a bit of a shift in the general approach to improvisation, particularly from classically trained musicians. But have you seen that within the orchestras that you've worked with, the groups that you've worked with over your career? Do you think there has been a shift towards a more creative approach to music making?
I think that it's it's slowly moving forward. I think one of the ways to move this forward is to bring in other art forms. So, for example, because our youngsters are so used to dealing with technology, certainly far more than I am, and hence my hair color. But I think that it's seeing how they can manipulate technology. So whether it's seeing putting up a little silent movie or some sort of advert, a TV advert or something like that, anything, a film that they've made, and then they create the music for that. Because, you know, thinking about the Foley artist side of things, which is an incredible art form, and of course, music making, where does the Foley start, end, music making start, end, and so on, you know, and I kind of see myself, you know, making shakers out of plastic cat containers or whatever it is, because I want a certain type of effect to happen. Or I've just got all sorts of, you know, bits of, I mean, the other day I bought the end of an ironing board iron rest thing. It was just an isolated thing. And you know, you can use that as a metal guiro, and it's absolutely fantastic. I bought some massive spanners, and when you strike those, it's just like a bell plate, you know. It's incredible, and I get excited by that, and I want people to feel, you know, excited about a spanner or a wrench or an old ironing board too. But it's not about the object itself. It's what is that feeling? What does it ignite? You know, what landscape sound palette can it create? And it's maybe bringing in other art forms as well that can ignite that, and therefore other interests. It could be a photo presentation, you know, but something that can allow our youngsters to naturally feed into what they're used to already. But with orchestras, I think a lot of the outreach work is really important. So, for example, I remember being artists in residence here at Cambridge, and it was with the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra, the RPO. And part of this was to spend a little time with a group of youngsters throughout the region, separately from the orchestra, whereby we went into what do you call it, a kind of farm place, you know, so they did all different types of animals and so on. And most of the kids had never ever been in front of a cow or a sheep or whatever it might have been. And so suddenly the idea was to record and find as many different sounds as possible from this whole landscape that they found themselves in, and then to describe that sounds, how they felt about those sounds and so on, and then together to build a piece of music up. And then there was an orchestrator there to help piece the whole thing together. This was presented to the orchestra, and the kids sat in with the members of the orchestra, and it was up to the youngsters to direct the players how they wanted this piece of music to be interpreted or to be negotiated. And so suddenly they were asking, you know, the violinist to play, you know, some obscure thing on the violin that they'd never thought about, you know, using their bow before. And the players were enthralled by that, actually. They really, really got it, and they were really happy to be part of this. And so together, you know, some of the players thought, gosh, I had no idea my violin could do that. And this is kind of what it's about, but it's listening to the youngsters. And I think this way around is really important, because it's just like a motorway. It's a two-way street, and we all, as we get older, you know, have to keep our own curiosity, our own inspiration going, and that very often comes from the younger generation. So listening to them is important. But it's slowly moving, but we've just got to keep chipping away.
Yeah, thanks, Evelyn. And you've tapped on another key theme for us, and I think for all of us here, but certainly for STEM Scotland, which is how can we place the young person really at the centre of their learning more and elicit things from them. So I think, yeah, fabulous stuff.
And it would be interesting. I mean, I don't know enough about this, so excuse me if I'm jumping the gun a little bit, but you know, when you mentioned that you have a weekly virtual improvisation program going, you know, is this possible to do the young people who are involved with Systema. I'm not saying weekly as such, but every now and again, is there something whereby they can all connect together? I don't know the practicalities of that, of course, but just as an idea to pop in the top.
It's a great one, and delighted to have you on board and your support. Yeah.
The other thing that I would like to say is, I remember years ago being a kind of visiting teacher at the Royal Scottish Conservatoire of Music, and they basically, two percussion teachers at that time, were really, really interesting, because this was not part of the coursework, not part of the curriculum, the program, at all. This was simply their vision to get the percussion players into schools for the deaf, into homes for different people, and put themselves in situations that they had never experienced before, didn't know what to do, they were uncomfortable with, and all of that kind of thing. Now, I know obviously this isn't going to happen with the young people from Systema, but nevertheless, what was important there was that they had to think on their feet, and they had to really think, who am I? I need to be able to communicate without my instrument as well as with my instrument. And it was absolutely fascinating how they grew as people by being in those situations that they felt slightly uncomfortable with. And I've had that experience myself, and I think it's really important that for our full-time students to think about this, because this will ignite that sense of improvisation that goes beyond playing the instrument.
Maria, I'd love to go to you next.
Thank you, Tricia, and thank you for Systema Scotland for building this bridge between Systema Europe, whose vice president I am, and there are several of our board members connected, and an artist we so admire like Evelyn Glennie. And in a way, we have known her as an artist much before the ambassador, but now it's a whole discovery. Systema Europe is a network really trying to share the resources and the ideas. And I think that our dialogue with academic or official music education benefits so much from being sort of prompted and almost shaken out of our sort of more traditional background. And, as someone who went to the Conservatoire in Milan, if I had been trained in improvisation along with extremely complicated solfège or other things like that, we really do not need. And what we need is something that makes us aware that the language of music is another language, like we speak Italian and English and whatever else on this panel, Finnish. And it would be so helpful to instigate this storytelling that Evelyn Glennie brought up before, as an additional channel from the beginning. And how this is what we were having as a chat before, how we all have to control this language at the same time as someone as articulate as the speakers who have spoken until now, and myself. I can really see the difference in style. I'm sort of all over the place. We all have a different style of language. Music is such a part of this language, because if we spoke like that, nobody would be able to understand that, and that's already has some kind of prosody, right? So in fact, music is in the language, and language couldn't do without music. And Andreas Knapp, who also joined us, reminded us of that a few days ago. So I would like to ask a little, and he has raised his hand. Maybe we will let Evelyn Glennie respond, and then take it from there. How do we balance this spontaneous communication of music and language and the control? And this is maybe has no answer, but I am sure that in the scope, the very wide scope of thinking and doing that Evelyn Glennie has put on the table, she has something to offer as to this particularly unending challenge.
Goodness, it is a big question, Maria, for sure, and I don't know what the answer is, and I don't really want to think that there could be an answer, because I think it's something that it's it's a privilege to always think about it, and that's the growth that we go through. But I think the more freedom you have, the more control you have. I mean, I've really realized that over this past 18 months or so since COVID-19, since the pandemic happened, is that, you know, with no concerts, having had everything evaporate from the diary quite literally, and being at home, is that I've connected with the instruments much, much more than ever before. And it's allowed me to completely and utterly re-engage with the instrument. So to pick an item and say hello to it and say, how are you? So, you know, let's have a little conversation without thinking that I have to prepare this for 7:30 on Tuesday, the 29th October 2022, and that, you know, it has to be of a certain standard and so on. And it's quite a different sort of process, really, in your thinking. As you know, it's one of those where, yes, you've accepted that date, so there's a responsibility to fulfill that date and to perform, you know, as best as you possibly can. There's quite a big difference to then picking something up with no deadline, no, you know, feeling that you have to prepare this for something and have the freedom to just explore it in any kind of way. And I found that by going right back to the basics, that very, very first lesson I had as a 12-year-old, well, please create the feeling of a tractor, please create the feeling of snowflakes, please create the feeling of wind or rain or whatever it is, that was my starting point when I was picking up all of these instruments. So, you know, there's never a case whereby simplicity needs to be ignored. That is something that we tap into every single day. That's our springboard in everything that we do. And sometimes things can be incredibly simple in order for us to get into the complexity of things. And you know, if we think of Indian music, we think, oh my gosh, that's so complex, and it is very complex if we allow that to be our entry point. But if we kind of really break it down, actually that entry point is really simple, and then we can build the house, you know, with these building blocks. And so I think with improvisation, you know, you can start with just simply one marimba bar or one violin string or one note on a clarinet, or one key on a piano, whatever it is. Start with that and think to yourself, right, I am only going to concentrate on sound color. That's all I'm going to think about. Or I'm only going to concentrate on rhythm, just using that one element. Or I'm only going to think about dynamics. Or I'm only going to think about resonance. Whatever it might be, you can decide, so no one is telling you what it has to be. But that is just the start of discovering another thing, another thing, another thing. And that really gives you an awful lot of armor and more control over the choices that you make when you're dealing with notated pieces of music. I think the difference might be when we think of control, when it comes to a performance arena where nerves kick in and the audience is there, and that creates a whole other scenario than the control that we might have in a practice room. And so for me, I get nervous. I absolutely get nervous. And I think most people do when they perform or when they do something that, you know, you have that responsibility to do. But I think what I try to do is every single time I pick something up, I negotiate it as though I'm performing, you know. So again, it's listening to the inside out and seeing that instrument as an extension of my limbs, as it were, and so that nothing then becomes separated in my thinking. So everything, as far as possible, just becomes a natural flow. Just as I open a door, you know, I use this hand, but equally I can use that hand, you know, so I'm not becoming hostage to only being able to open that door with my right hand and then thinking, I've hurt my right hand now, I've got to think about opening the door with my left hand. It should just be a natural thing in whatever you do. So, but it's opening up the opportunities. That's what improvisation does, and that really helps then the notated thing. But it's also knowing the difference between practice and rehearsal. So most of the time, even in the privacy of my own four walls, I'll be rehearsing. So I'll have a type of acoustic in my mind that I've decided to have in my mind at that time. It could be an outdoor acoustic, it could be a cathedral acoustic, it could be a really dry theatre acoustic, it could be a recording studio acoustic, it could be anything you want. And then it allows me to think, right, how might you project this particular exercise or scale or anything, phrase or bit of music that you're negotiating. So I decide which mallets I might need in order to project that in an outdoor acoustic or in a whatever, not just in the four walls of my studio. And then I use that sense of touch. So if I'm outdoors, there's much more physical energy that's happening, perhaps more than a contained situation in a recording studio where it's all about tone, 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 rather than exuberance. So this affects everything that you negotiate. So, and this is again what improvisation does. When I sometimes give performances of improvised concerts and maybe with someone else, there can be a huge time of just nothing happening because we're just deciding who might begin this piece of music, or, shall we just let the audience begin this music? Oh, has somebody sort of moved in their chair? Does that ignite that movement? Does that ignite then a little brrr on an instrument? Our whole listening changes in that respect. I don't know if I answered anything to with it, Maria, to be honest.
Well, no, it is. I think very much so, because you're always talking about interaction between various parts of your musical conception, or ideas that have to be followed and steered somehow, both followed and steers, and also the interaction between your inner representation and what you're trying to convey, and all of this is sort of the irreducible language of the musician. So I think we
sorry to interrupt.
Not at all.
Perhaps going back to Peter's thought about how improvisation is moving forward. I mean, the record companies are now allowing musicians to create totally improvised recordings. I mean, I think I've done 3 with Naxos, for example, whereby they've just said, right, if that's what you want to do, then go ahead and do it. And I remember when I made my very, very first improvised recording with BMG. This is back in the 90s or early 2000s or something. And I literally had to, they were so nervous about it, I literally had to feed down what we had recorded that day down the phone line at the end of the session so that they could sort of see what was going on, really. And so we've moved forward from those days for sure, where they're quite happy just to go with the project if they believe in the artists, of course. But nevertheless, so that's moved forward in a lot of cases. But I'd like to see more of this in actual scheduled concerts. And that applies to youth orchestras as well, and youth groups and choirs and you name it, right across the board.
Thank you, Evelyn. We're coming fairly close to our ending time, which is extraordinary. The time is flying by. I feel like listening to you, Evelyn, is like being inside a piece of music where you lose the sense of linear time, because it doesn't seem, the time's gone very fast. So I want to invite anyone else who has a question to either just raise your hand. You don't even have to write in the chat box because we can see you. Please take Andreas. Go for it.
And Patricia then afterwards, right after.
Right, yes, then Patricia.
Thank you. Hello, Evelyn. I'm very happy about this because I'm a drummer as well. So I know about curiosity, and nobody could hide about my curiosity, what can sound how in my childhood, including some damage, of course. My question is, we are a network mostly of teachers working with children. So my question to you is, how can we get the teachers curious and to listen to their children and to feed their curiosity, because when a child gets curious, it then starts to want to have knowledge. I think it's about this way. And I see it when we do projects with children who never played an instrument in their life before, ever. And from the day one, they improvise with us, or we let them improvise, finding out what can an instrument do. And we take it from there. And but I realize that a lot of teachers don't have the courage to get through this process. So what can we do? What would you suggest? How can we get teachers to get curious again themselves together with the children and to feed this curiosity? Because to feed the curiosity till the end of maybe a musical career is the most important thing. It's not about perfection. It's about curiosity. So what is your recommendation for that, please?
Oh my goodness, that's also a very a large question, and I don't know what the answer is, because to try and get every single teacher thinking in the same way is a tall order. I'm not saying it's impossible, but I think that the more we can begin to feed our young people as much of this kind of improvisation, curiosity, and so on, and to think, what is sound? What is music? How is sound used in our everyday lives? How is sound used when we switch the television on? Can you imagine the difference you might feel if there was no sound in your favorite television program, or in your favorite cartoon or something? What might the difference be? And trying to explore the contrasts, really. I think also the environment is important to think about. Is, if a teacher isn't curious about something, well, what are they curious about then? So what is it? What are the areas that they suddenly light up? And can we bring, or can there be a bridge from that sort of when they do light up to then feeding that through their music making, their sound creation, and so on? That might need perhaps a little bit of exploring. I do feel that for teachers, there's so little in their teacher training program, so little time in what they're exposed to, and how trivial it seems to be, in the scheme of things, in exploring this, which I think is such an important aspect, both for them and for the students. At the end of the day, I think it's important to say that we don't all feel inspired 24/7. We don't all feel curious 24/7. That would almost be impossible to do. We do have down days. We do have days where we're just sort of floundering. I have lots of days whereby I just think, I'm just not in the mood to do this. I'm not in the mood to practice. Or, gosh, I just feel as though I'm not moving ahead with anything, with a piece of music, or with a project, or whatever. And that's perfectly natural. But nevertheless, it's knowing that we need those feelings and that kind of downtime and that sort of lost feeling in order to then feel curious again once it does happen. But it is trying. What I find in my own situation is not for the same thing to happen in the same place all of the time in the same way. So sometimes, going outside and having a project outside is just what's needed, So thinking about the elements, having a project that is all about sound creation, music making, using the elements outside, using wind, using the earth, using our natural resources, using water, air, whatever it is, and seeing how that inspires someone, just being outside is a good thing for well-being. And just seeing how youngsters and teachers are, in a different environment. We all know that when we stand up on stage, we become different specimens. We all know that as soon as we walk into an airport, we become different specimens, or we just kind of, and, things change. And likewise, perhaps in the environment whereby we're teaching children, we can become different specimens. And sometimes we need to break out of that kind of environment, still within our, within practically what is possible, to think about that. But I think nowadays, with the explosion of the internet, the fact that we can talk to each other, it's quite good just to be able to say to someone, oh, you know what, I'm feeling a little bit like this with my youngsters at the moment. Can I just chat to you to see what you're doing? Or, you know, just to compare notes. We all need to do that at times. It's just being aware. I mean, one thing I found again over this past year with the instruments is that obviously, you know, I've looked so much more on YouTube at things. And what I found has happened there is that I've got to the point whereby I'm thinking, hold on a second, I'm looking at an awful lot on YouTube that I'm forgetting to look at myself. I'm forgetting to see, well, hold on, Evelyn, what do you want to explore with this instrument rather than seeing how someone else plays it? And so it's finding that boundary really between, yes, being inspired by other people, but just sort of, you know, going through that journey yourself as regards to, you know, building the armor up, as regards to working through the non-curious times and getting through that as well. So I don't know the answer to that. I think it's a huge question. I don't think there's a formula that we can all bottle up and just say, yep, I'll use that, you know, and sprinkle that on. But for you as a player, I'm sure, you know, you may understand the similarities that I might have, where yes, sometimes you're absolutely gung-ho and things progress, and then other days you just think, I'm just not in the mood, and ba-bum. And that's okay, in the same way that a youngster can feel, yeah, and then the next day you wonder, well, why aren't they paying attention? Why aren't they, you know, engaging in this? Well, they too can have little moments of just, you know what, I just simply don't feel like it today.
It's beautiful. I think that we may have to wind up with this because we are coming to the end of our time. As Eric just put in the chat box, we do urge everyone to watch Evelyn's amazing TED Talks and have your students watch them too. And Evelyn, I just want to give you heartfelt thanks from all of us. I hope you know that when your term as ambassador to Systema Scotland comes to an end, you will be immediately offered the position of World Systema Ambassador. We all want you because you're so inspiring for us, for our children, our teachers, everything. So thank you so much for this time.
You're very, very welcome, and thank you all. And can I just, you know, again say I really appreciate you, certainly Tricia and Eric, for getting up so incredibly early. And Eric, you just remain such an inspiring person for me, and I know so many too. And I'm just wondering, when is your next book out? And if it's not coming soon, will you hurry up with it, please? But I've thoroughly enjoyed everything that you've done for us.
Thank you, and thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you very
so much.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you, and thank you,
Thank
people.
you, everyone.